Good morning, students. Happy to be with you today. This is for the Thursday-Friday block for April 23rd and 24th. I really want you to just listen to some of the notes that I am going to describe, and then you will have a short writing assignment to do for Thursday and Friday. Next week, we're going to look at more the project that I had mentioned the other day, but for this week, it'll mostly just be some notes and information to cover about the origins of World War II, how we got to this point. I've already talked about how the Treaty of Versailles was really doomed to failure, and so we can look at World War II as a 20-year break of World War I. Nothing was really resolved, and the Treaty of Versailles was an absolute ridiculous, foolish document that didn't do a lot. And what I wanted to get across to you, and I mentioned this a bit on Monday and Tuesday, but I really wanted to stress it, is that, do you see in that cartoon right here of, it says Chamberlain on the apron? This is Neville Chamberlain, and it was Great Britain who really continued to give in to Hitler. If Great Britain was considered the powerful European country, the dominant European country at this time, mostly because they were not in the same economic situation that France was after World War I. They were probably more stable than other countries in Europe, and so it was really Great Britain that should have taken the lead to stop Hitler, and they didn't. They kept appeasing and appeasing. They kept pacifying him and giving in to his demands. And so we see at the Munich conference, really they allowed Hitler to do as he wished, mostly to avoid war. But that gave Hitler the confidence, I guess you could say, that he needed, that he knew he could kind of walk all over European nations. However, Hitler was becoming weary of Soviet power. Now, do you remember the Schlieffen Plan? Are you thinking in your head, oh, what was the Schlieffen Plan? The Schlieffen Plan was that two-part plan that was put into place during World War I. Remember, it was an old plan that was even drawn up around the time of the Franco-Prussian War, but it was put into place in World War I. And the idea was Germany would first attack France and then turn their attention toward Russia because they didn't want a two-front attack. Well, Hitler, I wouldn't call him a mastermind, but I would say that he knows enough not to try to take on Russia again. And so he's very weary of Soviet power. And so rather than saying, first we're going to fight against France and then we're going to fight against Russia because, Hitler wants more and more land, this idea of Lebensraum, living space, he decides to make a pact with Russia. Now, I don't think this was a genuine alliance. I don't think that Hitler really wanted to, but he makes a deal with Stalin, and it's called the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, which essentially says, you don't attack us, we won't attack you. You don't get involved in our affairs, we won't get involved in your affairs. Now, I don't think Hitler was at all planning on holding true to his word. However, I don't really think Stalin was either. But for the time being, they made this pact together. So this is exactly what, everything is in place for Hitler to make his move. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, and we look at September 1st, 1939 as the beginning of World War I. This is what starts World War I. A lot of people have heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. That's what brought the United States into World War I in 1941. But it had been raging for 2 years in Europe before the United States ever got involved. So Germany is invading Poland. They want to take over Poland. They don't think anybody's going to, Hitler doesn't think anybody's going to give him grief over Poland. And especially since he signed the non-aggression pact with the Soviets, he doesn't think Stalin is going to care. And so France and Britain declare war on Germany 2 days later, basically in retaliation, saying you cannot attack a poor, defenseless country for no reason just because you think you're entitled to it. Hitler maybe thought that they were just going to say, okay, go ahead. But they didn't. Now France and Britain step up and declare war on Germany, and World War II has then begun. But this is the war in Europe. Know that the war in Europe was only half of the war. I think it's the war that gets more maybe attention and understanding, but the war in the Pacific was just as great. And so Japan's path to war had a lot of the same progression, I guess I would say, and build up to power that really the same way Hitler and Stalin did to a point. And it goes way back. And a lot of it has to do with communism and the spread of communism, but also the spread of kind of totalitarian regimes. And Japan's path to war starts with an area called Manchuria. Now look at that map. Manchuria is a part of China. It's in that kind of light pink area. You can see it's a part of China, but it's very close to the Soviet border. You can see where Japan is right there. Tokyo is the capital. They have control of Korea and Japan. They're setting their sights on mainland China. So Japan, I guess you could say they had control, kind of like control of the territory, and they want to take it from the Chinese. So they invade China for resources, because remember what I've said before, China had it all. China was able to self-sustain themselves because they were such a huge country with so many natural resources. Look at how small Japan is. They need resources. So the Japanese army is in Manchuria, and they blow up a section of the railroad in Manchuria. Now, they did it purposefully. The Japanese military did it purposefully, but they made it look like the Chinese did it, and they blame it on the Chinese. And it's become known as the Mukden incident. Well, when they make it look like the Chinese are sabotaging their own railroad, it gives Japan like the justification. Now, this is all on the surface, because underneath, the Japanese really know what's going on. But on the surface to the world, it looks like the Chinese are being the aggressors, when actually it's the Japanese. So they basically take over Manchuria and rename it Manchukuo. Manchukuo is the renamed area of Manchuria. Now it's under Japanese control. All right, so that's maybe bad enough. However, when they forcefully take over this area, the United States and the League of Nations places sanctions on Japan. And these sanctions mean, Japan, because you did this, you can't get resources or money or say like food supplies, or we're going to stop trade and things like that. So Japan says, well, okay, and they withdraw from the League of Nations. Now remember, the United States is not even in the League of Nations. Remember, the League of Nations was the Woodrow Wilson plan that the United States never even joins. But they withdraw from the League. They kind of say, whatever, we're already in China. We can use China's resources. Well, Chiang Kai-shek at this time is a Chinese nationalist leader. Chiang Kai-shek is the man over there on the right with the balding head with the big smile on his face. He is a Chinese nationalist. Now, we all remember what the word nationalism means, pride for your country. And after the last Chinese dynasty kind of fell and went into decline, China couldn't really get their act together, and they were susceptible and vulnerable to attacks. Well, people like Chiang Kai-shek wanted to bring back China for China. He wanted to make China great again. And he was having to kind of fight against people who also wanted to make China great, but on the communist side. Well, the communist kind of leader at this time is a guy named Mao Zedong. And you see Mao Zedong down there on the bottom right-hand side. Usually he just goes by Mao. Sometimes he's known as Chairman Mao. But Chiang Kai-shek felt that the communist threat was a bigger threat than Japanese threat. And so Mao is going to have to like fight for his country, and Chiang is going to have to fight for their country, but now they have to do it against Japan, who wants to get their hands on this country. Eventually, these two kind of unite together for the good of Chinese against Japan. It takes a few years, it takes several years. The Mukden incident is in 1931, and we'll see it's several years before they actually kind of rally together. Eventually they come together in the Nanjing Republic, and some of it has to do with the rape of Nanjing. I don't know how much of detail I want to get in on the video, but the rape of Nanjing is something that I've found out over the years that 99% of my students have never, ever heard of. I've learned over the years that 99% of my students absolutely know something or are aware of the Holocaust. And about 99% of my students have never even heard of a place called Nanjing, let alone what happened there. And it's really the brutality and the horrible torture of what the Japanese did to Chinese civilians. They kill about 100,000 civilians, men, women, children. They especially target the women and the children because at this point men were being drafted into service, and so cities were left without men to support the city or to defend the city. The Japanese came into Nanjing and literally, it's just it's the worst atrocity ever. Again, I don't know if I want to get into the details of how bad it was. If you want to look up some of the details of the rape of Nanjing, prepare yourself, steel yourself for the horrors and the atrocities of the things that you'll read. Even that picture right there of that baby, looking at his dead mama. It's pretty tough to understand, but this is what the Japanese forces were doing in China. Absolute brutality. At this point, Chiang Kai-shek is really the one who's got probably more power than Mao Zedong, and Chiang Kai-shek will not surrender. They're kind of moved and pushed into areas of China, but no matter what, China does not surrender to Japan. So Japan wants to get Eastern Soviet resources. Now remember, think about where the USSR is, where the Soviet Union is, and think about where Japan and therefore Manchuria are. Um, Japan wants these resources, and they think that things are going to be okay until they side with Germany. When the Soviets and the Germans signed the non-aggression pact, remember when I talked about Hitler and Stalin kind of making this agreement that it probably wasn't really genuine? So when that happens, now all of a sudden Japan is feeling like, well, shoot, we thought we could count on the Soviets and now we can't. So now what do we do? So now Japan shifts their focus to South Asia and French Indochina for resources. French Indochina at that time is what we call Vietnam. So now Japan is looking toward the areas of the Philippines, the areas of Vietnam, the areas of the whole kind of Pacific Southeast. And if you can see the writing on the wall, they're going to set their sights on areas because they need resources. They are a very small country with a powerful military, and they need more natural resources. They're trying to get it from China. China is not backing down. They can't get it from Russia, where they were hoping to make an alliance. Now they're setting their sights on Southeast Asia. So the only question that I ask for you to do in these next 2 days is to go back and think about that aggression that Hitler started. And there's going to be a question posted of really, it's your opinion and back it up, of the Great Britain's role in allowing Hitler to be so aggressive and appease him and give in to his demands. So that's it for the day. Have a great one. We'll talk to you later.